So why don't we start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what your exposures to like healthcare systems were prior to your pregnancy, either in the UK and Australia, if you have any kind of comparisons.
Yeah, okay. So I am a 37-year-old, fairly averagely healthy British woman. Been living in Australia for 10 years now, and coming from almost 30 years of NHS public health in England, so very used to everything being quite set and organised, and you know exactly where to go for what thing. It was obviously a bit of a change coming to Australia, realising that there's quite a more of an even split here between private and public health, I feel, depending on socio-economic background and where you're from and that kind of thing. And although I have had private health cover since I've been here, it was part of what I had to have for my visa when I first moved here as a student. I've only ever used the private health system once or twice. Everything else has just been public because it's always seemed to me to be easier to access public health through Medicare. So I'm 38, almost 39 weeks pregnant now, and my whole pregnancy has been within the public health system. So paying for to see a doctor and an obstetrician through the public system. So it's not a bulk billed doctor. So even though it's public health, I'm still paying to see them. And then all of my appointments since about 20 weeks have been through the Royal Women's Hospital, through their public system. Yeah.
Do you shop around at all with, so you said you've almost exclusively used the public system.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any thoughts about whether you wanted to do your pregnancy through a private system, or
yes.
How did you kind of manage that specific decision?
So I had basic level private health cover up until about the middle of last year, and then I was pregnant in March 2019, and then had a miscarriage in April. And then after that, about 3 months after that, decided to up my health cover, thinking in the future about like IVF and assisted fertility treatments, but then didn't end up needing that. It happened that the date of my upgraded health cover from base level to premium top level happens to fall on my exact due date of this current pregnancy. So I'm not covered for any of the pregnancy things, which was the main thing that guided my decision. Although I did have a look at the cost and availability and the experience that I know that you could have privately here. And when I was looking at the kind of birth I wanted and what hospitals offer, I didn't feel like the cost and the experience was worth it to go through a private system. It just seemed like because I fall within the bracket of the Royal Women's Hospital, it seemed like everything they offered is what I wanted anyway, and I didn't see the extra benefit that the private health system would offer.
So you said you were 37?
Yeah.
So just to pry, I don't want to seem like I'm prying too much, but I'm getting all these phone calls. So does that classify you as a high-risk pregnancy?
So yes, it does class me as high risk, or it did. But I've been low risk all the way through, and everything has been low risk. And I'm listed as kind of, when they have their traffic light system, I believe it's something along those lines, something really rudimentary like that. I'm only in the orange bracket because of my age. If it was a year ago, I wouldn't be. And everything else is low risk. So they're treating me as if I'm low risk in terms of appointments and how regular they are and whether they're face-to-face or telehealth.
So I sent you that article about kind of patient information-seeking attitudes, and outside of, we'll just talk about you generally, and then we'll talk about you in medicine. What do you view your kind of information gathering strategies are? Do you, like, for instance, if you're going to go buy a TV or a car, do you obsessively read through reviews and everything, or is it kind of, what comes along, that seems like a good deal, I'm going to go for it? Kind of just talk about how you.
I'm a planner and a prepper, so I tend to research the heck out of things. So I'd go down routes of reviews through, and I try and find unbiased review sites. So ones where they have no link or affiliation to particular brands. Let's say I was buying a washing machine. I'd try and go through Consumer Choice or something like that I know is fairly unbiased. I'd pull that together and I'd have a look at reviews from big sites like Amazon and combine all that, depending on the cost of the item. So when I bought a car 2 or 3 years ago, a new car, there was like a whole file on my computer with like research and like spreadsheets and things. So I like to be quite informed in terms of information gathering. That just gives you some idea.
Like Angela's a spreadsheet woman. I mean, Angela used to work for my wife, and she just loved everything in her life is a spreadsheet. I think more or less. So let's then in healthcare. Now, did you say that you'd had much exposure to healthcare prior to the pregnancy, or?
I didn't cover that off. Not particularly. I haven't had any big illnesses personally in my life. So I had asthma growing up, but that's minor. So it would just, that pretty much would be my only exposure, really. Been into hospital for minor surgery once. And that's it. I've never broken a bone or anything. So, yeah.
All right. So when you got pregnant or were planning to become pregnant, what kind did you like actively start searching out information about pregnancy, and if so, what were kind of the resources you used to find that information?
In terms of planning pregnancies, are you saying like prior to
planning, or like once you were pregnant, did you worry, oh, what should I be eating, what should I be
okay. Yeah, so prior to falling pregnant, I would have looked at so I looked at like apps, like ovulation apps and all of those kind of things, which I'd been doing for months or 2 years previously anyway, and then researched the best ones of those to use. And then upon falling pregnant, it was information overload, really. So I looked at anything I could in terms of, in terms of how to have a healthy pregnancy. So I looked at websites from Australia, but also from the UK and the States. In fact, it was Canada rather than the US. I don't know, I seem to trust it more. I also went to the library and got bunches of books out. Again, downloaded apps onto my phone to tell me what I should be eating at what stage and that kind of thing.
How did you pick the apps?
I
views, or were these recommended by?
I'd just Google kind of, best pregnancy app Australia or something like that, because I found whilst looking for the apps that they had quite a regional variation in terms of what the government mandates you should be doing was very, very strict in the States, and then quite strict in Australia, and then a little bit more lax in the UK, it felt. So I'd kind of pull the information from that and then see which was the best one for me to use.
So you got a lot of books and et cetera. Do you ever find yourself coming across contradictory information?
In terms of things like foods you can eat, just as an example, definitely all the time. And now later on in pregnancy, when I'm looking at things like breastfeeding, it all seems to be contradictory, to be honest. And because all of the information, or 95% of the information I'm getting is from my own research online, I have to be very careful with what's evidence-based and what's opinion-based. Yeah, because it's very contradictory.
Have a rubric that you use to determine whether the evidence that's being presented to you feel is evidence-based?
I don't have anything as organized as a rubric, but I would.
I was throwing a little teaching term out that I thought I maybe.
Yeah. But I should do. But I do research into the source. So I'm not just going to find a listing on Google and click on it and go, okay, great, that website that I've never even heard of says that, so I'm going to take that as gospel. I'll make sure I go, okay, so that's from website ABC. Let's have a look at them. Who is that? Is that a private science firm that are trying to spruik their product, or, you know, is it government, or is it a bunch of scientists who have actually done some research and peer-reviewed, you know, journals and whatnot?
Okay. How much of the information that you've gathered on your own do you take with you, you know, either virtually or in person, and discuss with your obstetrician or the care team?
Quite a lot, because 3 out of 4 appointments have been telehealth appointments, and I found that unless I have my own information and have my questions that I want to ask, the conversation goes, how are you? I'm well. Great. Here's your next appointment. Okay, thanks. Bye. And it lasts about 2 minutes. So I've gone in with my own questions and my own information. As an example, last time I went in face-to-face, I talked about a particular test that they do in pregnancy for a bacteria called GBS. And I'd done a lot of reading on this particular bacteria and how they treat it in Australia as opposed to America and the UK, and there's differing ways that they treat it within the hospital system, and I wanted to talk to the midwife about that. And that opened up an interesting conversation, because the first thing she said was, well, why would you do the test if you didn't want to have the antibiotics anyway? And I said, well, I think it would be interesting just to know if I was GBS positive or not, and then I could use this to make a decision. And she was quite confused by that, I felt. So okay. I felt a bit bad then for taking in my own information.
Just to clarify, so do you see a midwife? Do you see a midwife and an obstetrician? What's kind of the makeup of the care team that you?
So it's a midwife. So they have the I don't know if you know about it, but in the public system they have like caseload midwives with just your handful of pregnant women, and then they have midwives in small teams, and then they have just all of the midwives, and unless you are high risk, you're just in the bunch with all the midwives. So each time I have an appointment, telephone or face-to-face, it's just with a midwife that works at the women's, and I don't think I've seen or spoke to the same one twice.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So what kind of data has been collected on you during this pregnancy? So I kind of the earlier interview, I guess there's certain genetic tests that are done or offered. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of what kind of like monitoring of your health and what monitoring of the fetus's health?
So I had the genetic test early on, and then there's 2 ultrasounds, one at 12 weeks, one at 20 weeks. Every time I go in, they check my blood pressure. So that's only twice since 20 weeks that I've been in, actually, 28 weeks and then 36 weeks. The other appointments have been once a month up until 36 weeks, where there was a face-to-face, and then on Monday this week I had a telephone appointment, and then I'll have, if I haven't had baby by then, I'll have another face-to-face on my 40-week appointment. Just let me get this because it's a bit bright in the background. Might be better, yeah. Where was I?
Yeah.
Face-to-face.
They
Yeah,
do blood
sorry,
pressure.
the data they're collecting. Yeah, so each time I've been in there, just check my blood pressure and then just do the fundal measurement, and that's it, really. Nothing else.
So how were the genetic results communicated with you?
That's a private firm, so you go in and have it done privately, and then they just send you the information in the post, and then you take that with you to your, so I took that with me to my 20-week appointment, I think, and they just say, okay, that's normal, type of thing, and that's it. And they put a copy of your file.
So they tell you it's normal. Did you, like the raw report, did it seem understandable at all to you, or is it kind of gibberish?
Yeah, it wasn't in patient speak. It was definitely in health speak, and it just had a whole list of what I'm assuming are the chromosomal pairs that they look at, and then another list of things, and then a whole bunch of stuff, and then it just has normal written somewhere on it. So
was that sufficient for you, or would you have wanted to have known more detail about what?
I wonder if it was abnormal, whether they would send you the same thing or not. Because I imagine to have that back and then to say abnormal would be really worrying. Yeah, I did then look myself online at what they look at, and in fact Warwick and I both did look at what they look at, and there's even different people that offer slightly different tests that offer different degrees of, you know, things that they look at within the fetus. Yeah, it wasn't very informative at all.
This may be a little kind of a sidebar kind of comment, but kind of my personal preference is I want the data as soon as possible, and then I will, be glad to talk to my physician about it. When you're saying, like, if the tests were abnormal, would you have preferred to not have any results back until you have an opportunity to talk to the physician? Or midwife, or?
I think that, I don't know actually. Probably if it's abnormal, although if you think that you're going to receive a letter if it's normal, and then you don't receive a letter but you get a phone call to go in and talk about it, you're immediately going to go, okay, there's something wrong with that. I guess it would be good to just have one or the other. So always get a letter, whether it's abnormal or normal, or always have to go into the doctor and talk to them about it, one or the other, for peace of mind.
So now that you've switched to this kind of telehealth because of COVID-19, are you monitoring your own blood pressure and other things? And so how do you do that?
Yeah, so I've got a blood pressure monitor from my sister-in-law, and I just take that every day. I had a high blood pressure incidence once earlier on in the pregnancy, like 28 or 29 weeks, when I was at the hospital for that appointment. So I had to stay in for like 4 hours and just have a protein test, and then they did a blood pressure test every hour, and then told me that I should take my own every week. So they said you can go into a chemist and get it done, but with COVID, I didn't particularly want to go into a chemist and get it done every week, so I just found my own one and have been taking that probably 2 or 3 times a week.
Okay, and then how do you communicate the results back to the Royal Women's Hospital people?
So when they call up for my fortnightly or monthly call, they just say, have you had your blood pressure taken recently? What was it? And then they note it down.
So all of your communication is either in person or on phone. There's not like a website that you can log into and access your information or upload any information?
No.
Okay.
No.
Royal Melbourne's is actually, I mean, Royal Women's, all the Parkville hospitals are actually implementing a electronic health record, which has a patient portal on it called My Chart,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
you can log in, you can send messages, and then you can look up your own results, things like that.
Oh.
Is that something that you think that you would really like, once it's available?
Yeah, that would have been useful because I feel like with the few tests I have had, waiting to find out the results, let's say the blood test, the diabetes, the glucose test that you have, or the GBS test, I've had to remember to note down in the notes on my phone, ask the midwife this when they call, because I find that if you don't ask them, they don't tell you, and then you're left at the end of the phone call hanging up thinking, so was that positive and they forgot to tell me, or is everything fine, which is why they didn't tell me. It would be really useful to be able to go in and look at your own results and things. Yeah.
That's in the time that I've been in Australia, that's been my biggest what I've missed the most about healthcare in the US is being able to interact with my data digitally and communicate with my providers with kind of messaging, because when I talk on the phone I don't always understand what there's you know sometimes my GP has an accent, and I'm on the phone in some noisy place and she's telling me something and I'm just so
Yeah. So a couple of my phone calls were when I was at school teaching, and I was unable to reschedule them, and they I don't know whether they are as time sensitive when you're just doing them on the phone as opposed to going in, but I didn't feel able to reschedule them. So a couple of the times I was just at school in my classroom and I'd just have to nip outside, leave the kids in there whilst I talked to the midwife. So yeah, I understand that.
I'll have to text this to you afterwards, but for my class I looked up how many times I had logged in. So for the 6 years we lived in Salt Lake City before I moved here, I think
Yeah.
I logged into my portal 800 times and
Oh my
sent
gosh.
like 90 messages, to a care provider. So I'm I'm a heavy user of that. So so you're only a few weeks away from your due date.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you have like a birth plan that you worked out, and have you communicated this with your care providers? I guess kind of the question is, as you know once labor started and there's kind of these acute processes going on, have you like kind of preset some plans and information sharing, or how you're going to handle things, or is that still kind of more fluid? You're a planner, so I'm assuming that.
Yeah. So at my maybe 20-week appointment, when the first round of restrictions were coming into place, they took away all of the antenatal classes that you could go to through the women's. So I'd already booked onto them, but I knew they were cancelled because they'd been cancelled through Eventbrite. So I talked to the midwife about it and said, what can I do to prepare myself for the birth? And she said, look online, which was not a very helpful comment. So, I did obviously look online and start my own courses through hypnobirthing, which is a style of birthing, I guess you can call it. And as part of that, you create a birth plan or birth map that they then encourage you to share with your provider. When I spoke to my midwife at the Women's about that, she said, definitely do one. And we talked about it very briefly at the 36-week appointment. Very briefly in terms of, she said, have you had this booklet from the Women's? And I said, yes, I've had it. And she said, great, read the second part of it now, type of thing. And when I talked to the midwife last week, I said, okay, I've got my birth plan. Do I need to send it in? And she said, no, just bring it in with you. So,
Your patch bag, so you don't.
yeah, it's all in there. It's all sorted, Brian. I'm very organized. It's all like in triplicate. Warwick's got a copy. They'll have a copy. I'll have a spare copy.
So, How is communication with your partner about information, and how involved has he been in, and like, you're going to be kind of answering for him, but how has his information seeking strategies and um, things related, played out during the pregnancy?
He's right here if you want him to answer that.
Well, if he wants to.
Do you want to answer that, Warwick?
Yes.
You can come round.
What was it? How?
Yeah, how have you been involved in terms of information gathering? So just to Tracy, his comment, he hasn't been to any of the appointments because he hasn't been allowed.
Yeah, so I've basically just been getting whatever information from Lucy because I couldn't go to any of the appointments. Any questions that I had, you would kind of ask on my behalf, or you would already know the answer to. Yeah, so that was the kind of tricky part of it, was that I really wasn't or haven't been involved in any of the stuff to do with the midwives. I think I've met one midwife on our very first appointment before all this.
12 weeks down.
Yeah, I think it might have been the 12-week one where it was like, yeah, just the very, very first basic one. And yeah, other than that, haven't been able to do any of that. So in terms of getting information, it's basically been from Lucy, or it's been whatever books and stuff that you've got to read, I've had a look at, or whatever,
Has that been frustrating, or has that been, that hasn't really bothered you very much?
Probably would have been better for me to maybe be not force fed, but just
So you would have been part of the antenatal classes.
Yeah, I would have
which
gone
would
to
have
the
been
classes.
about 10 hours worth of face-to-face classes, which he would have had to go to with me. And we would have both had to sit there through all of this information.
Which, yeah, probably would have made me feel more knowledgeable than I currently feel. But, yeah.
You might just be in shock during the whole labor, sitting in the corner.
Because we've done Lucy found some good online courses that she's done, and I've watched the parts of those that I've needed to. So that's been good. But yeah, the hospital doesn't really. Did they provide any alternative when they cancelled those courses?
No, she just said look online.
Yeah.
To do my own research, basically. I think that's probably changed now.
Yeah,
because it was very soon after.
Yeah.
They got their act together better probably as time went on. Is that what you're?
I'd hope so. Yeah.
So I just kind of had a curiosity question. So you are going to Royal Women's, is it, which much farther than say the Alfred? Was there a particular reason that that's the public hospital versus a closer public hospital?
So the Alfred don't have a maternal health section. So okay. when I miscarried last year, I went to the Alfred, and when I went in there after they got me sorted and everything, they did say, "Oh, you kind of should have just gone to the women's for this type of thing." They said, "Look, we're not really set up for anything." So from what I understand, if you are in the public health system in Melbourne, especially in this part of Melbourne, central, southeast, you're either at the women's in Parkville or you're at the women's in Sandringham, and it covers quite a large area between those two hospitals. So I imagine when it comes down to it, they're going to be very busy.
Some kind of specialization that's happened with within the health sector's organization. So kind of two final questions. One is, what has surprised you the most about your healthcare experience with the pregnancy?
The lack of information. I think we've been left of, I feel, I say we because I've been on forums with other women who were pregnant throughout winter 2020. So we've been comparing our experiences, and from a lot of first-time mums, they feel really up in the air. And I know that I wouldn't know as much as I know if I hadn't been proactive and looked at what should I be finding out at this stage of my pregnancy and what should I be asking my midwife. If I was in a different situation, or maybe perhaps a lot younger, I would just be really in the dark about what to expect. I just think with COVID it's been, there just hasn't been much information.
You're
particularly
really left to your own devices with it.
Very much.
Especially if nothing's particularly wrong or you don't need any extra care. They pretty much have been like checking up on you, but otherwise just,
So they've never once checked like the percentile weight of baby, asked me about my diet or like anything else.
Yeah, I think
so. I could be eating Big Macs every day and they would not have a clue. So.
I imagine they probably talked to you about like high risk things like alcohol or smoking, right?
Yeah. So that was in that booklet that they gave me, which they kind of just said to read. But they've briefly glossed over those and said, okay, not to do this and not to do this.
Follow up. Just here's the information. Here's the book.
Yeah. But think, for example, something like the way you sleep when you're pregnant is quite important, and that wasn't really covered. So you're not supposed to sleep on your back after a certain time, and all this kind of thing, and just things that are quite important but quite elemental. I felt weren't covered very well. That would be mine.
So if you had at your disposal a team of like a half a dozen software engineers, programmers, and a health designer, what would be kind of the information technology thing that you'd want to see implemented to improve the experience that you have?
A way to communicate with midwives at the hospital would be really useful. I have found that the information they've provided when I've asked for it has been really good. So a way to get that information, particularly from the hospital, because I know different hospitals have different, not standards, but practices, let's just say. That would be useful. And then, a way to maybe update my own information. So put my own blood pressure in weekly, things like that. Just
your birth plan.
Yeah.
If you had an interactive portal, like to communicate between the two, and say, because we haven't been assigned an individual person to manage it all, any one of the midwives, say that they had a system where they're meant to check every 2 weeks or every month or whatever on your progress. If you'd updated your blood pressure in there regularly or posted any questions or things like that, that basically any one of those healthcare professionals would be able to bring your profile up, have a quick glance through it, check if you're all normal, answer your questions, and
it would save that, what I ended up doing, which is having a whole list of questions in my phone which I'd saved up from a month, and luckily they weren't super important, but if there was a problem I would have maybe gone, okay, that's a problem, and I'll just file that in my phone to ask them in 3 weeks' time, which is probably not the best, most healthiest way to do things.
Okay, well, this was great. Thanks for doing it. Once I have the video edited, I'll send you a link, and you can just look over it and make sure that you didn't say anything you didn't want to say, or okay. we can edit stuff out before I send it on to the students. But this was really informative, and I think that they'll really appreciate being able to listen to your story and think about how their careers might move to improve circumstances. So thanks a lot. Have a good day.
All right. Cheers, Brian. Take care.
Okay,
bye.